Beyonce. Okay. For reminding us. Can I get a towel? Can I get my second black shirt change? Reminding us that there's no genre in music that we have not touched. Thank you, Beyonce. Give it up for Beyonce.
This might be one of the most uncomfortable moments the internet has seen in a while. Because out of nowhere, Ray J just dropped a series of statements so wild, so unexpected, that even longtime fans didn't know how to react. And the name at the center of it all? Beyonce. Yeah, that Beyonce. Now, here's what makes this situation explode. This isn't coming from some random blog or anonymous account. This is someone who's been in the industry for years, someone who has defended major names in the past, suddenly switching tone and saying things that instantly spark chaos online. And the moment those statements started circulating, everything went left. Clips started spreading. People started replaying the exact words. And within minutes, the internet split into two sides. On one side, you've got people saying, this is too specific to ignore. But on the other, they're just wild claims. Where's the proof? And that tension, that's what's making this situation spiral. Because this isn't just about what was said. It's about why it was said. Why now? Why target someone like Beyonce, who's built a reputation of being extremely private and controlled when it comes to her personal life? And here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. Because the more people dig into Ray J's history, his past statements, and his sudden shift in tone, the more questions start to surface. Is this real? Is this attention? Or is this something else entirely playing out behind the scenes? Because if even part of what's being implied has any truth, then this isn't just a viral moment. It's the beginning of something much bigger. And trust me, the deeper you go into this situation, the more confusing it gets. To understand why this situation has people this divided, you have to zoom out, way out, because what's happening right now isn't just about a few shocking comments. It's about reputation, timing, and how quickly narratives can spiral when big names get pulled into the conversation. At the center of it all is Beyonce, someone whose public image has been built on control, consistency, and near total privacy when it comes to her personal life. For years, she's managed to keep the spotlight on her work, the music, the performances, the brand. Even when rumors pop up, they rarely stick for long. That's not by accident. It's a strategy. And right next to that image is Jay-Z, not just a partner, but a powerhouse in his own right. Together, they've created a level of influence that goes beyond music. Business, culture, industry, connections, everything about them is calculated, measured, and protected. That's why when anything even close to controversy surfaces involving them, it instantly becomes a headline. Now enter Ray J. Because his position in this situation is what makes it unpredictable. Ray J isn't new to viral moments. He's been part of conversations that blew up online before, sometimes defending people, sometimes challenging narratives, and sometimes just saying things that leave everyone confused about his angle. That unpredictability, it's exactly why his recent comments caught so much attention. Because here's the thing, he hasn't always been someone who attacks major figures like this. In fact, there have been moments where he's shown respect, even publicly defended certain industry names when others were criticizing them. So when someone like that suddenly shifts tone, people notice immediately. And that's exactly what happened here. Because the moment his recent statements started circulating, the reaction wasn't just shock, it was confusion. Why would he say this? Why now? What changed? And that's where the background becomes important. Because in today's industry, timing is everything. Statements don't just drop randomly anymore. They hit at specific moments when attention is high, when conversations are already happening, when people are watching closely. And right now, the environment is perfect for things like this to spread. Social media doesn't wait for confirmation. It reacts instantly. Clips get cut, reposted, reworded, and within minutes, the original context starts getting lost. What begins as a statement becomes a theory. That theory becomes a narrative. And that narrative, it starts growing on its own. That's exactly what we're seeing here. Because instead of focusing on whether anything is actually proven, the internet is doing what it always does, connecting dots. Old interviews, past relationships, previous headlines. Everything is being pulled back into the conversation, even if it has nothing to do with what's happening now. And suddenly, what started as a few shocking comments becomes something much bigger, a full-blown debate. Now here's where things get even more complicated. Because this isn't just about Ray J and what he said. It's about how different audiences are interpreting it. Some people see it as attention-seeking. Others see it as speaking out. And then there's a third group, the most engaged one, who don't fully believe it, but also don't fully dismiss it. And that group? That's the one driving the conversation forward. Because uncertainty keeps people watching. If something is clearly true, the story ends quickly. If something is clearly false, it fades out. But when it sits in the middle, that's when it spreads. That's when people start debating. That's when engagement spikes. And right now, this situation is sitting right in that space. Unclear, unconfirmed, but impossible to ignore. And that's exactly why it's growing. But there's another layer most people aren't talking about yet, and that's credibility. Because no matter how shocking a statement is, it always comes down to one question. Do people believe the person saying it? And that's where things get tricky. Because Ray J's history works both ways. On one hand, he's been close enough to the industry to know things. On the other, he's also had moments where his statements felt exaggerated or unclear. So now the audience is stuck trying to figure out where this situation falls. Is this one of those moments where he actually knows something? Or is this another example of things being said for attention? And the truth is, right now, nobody knows. Which is exactly why the conversation isn't slowing down. Because as long as that question remains unanswered, people will keep watching, keep debating, and keep waiting for the next piece of information to drop. And here's the part that really keeps this story alive. Nobody directly involved has responded. No confirmations, no denials, just silence. And silence in a situation like this, it doesn't calm things down. It amplifies them. Because now, people aren't just reacting to what was said, they're reacting to what wasn't said. And that opens the door for even more speculation, more theories, more interpretations, more attention. So now we're at a point where this situation isn't just about one statement anymore. It's about everything around it. The timing, the reaction, the silence, the history. All of it combining into something that feels bigger than the original moment itself. And if there's one thing we've learned from situations like this, it's that they don't stay at this level for long. Because eventually, something shifts, someone speaks, or another detail surfaces that pushes the story in a completely new direction. And when that happens, everything changes again. Because right now, we're not looking at the full picture. We're looking at the setup. And whatever comes next is going to determine how this entire situation is remembered. And this is where everything stops being just shock value and turns into a full-blown conflict. Because the moment Ray J's comments started spreading across platforms, the internet didn't just react. It fractured instantly. On one side, you had people replaying every word, dissecting tone, trying to figure out whether there was any truth behind what he was implying about Beyonce. On the other, people were shutting it down immediately. No proof. Just talk. Another viral moment. And just like that, the conversation stopped being about what was said and became about whether it should have been said at all. Because here's what made this different. This wasn't a vague comment. This wasn't a subtle hint. This was direct enough to make people uncomfortable, but not clear enough to be confirmed. And that middle ground, that's where chaos lives. Because when something is too bold to ignore, but too unclear to prove, people fill in the gaps themselves. And that's exactly what started happening. Old clips resurfaced. Past interactions got pulled back into the spotlight. Random timelines were created by fans trying to connect things that may or may not even be related. And suddenly, the narrative wasn't just about Ray J anymore. It became about the entire ecosystem around Jay-Z and Beyonce. Because when you mention names at that level, you're not just starting a conversation. You're stepping into something much bigger. Now here's where the conflict deepens. Because people didn't just question the claims, they questioned Ray J himself, his credibility, his timing, his motive. And this is where things start to turn on him. Because while some were asking, what if there's truth here? Others were asking something much sharper. Why is he the one saying this? And that question hit harder than anything else. Because it forced people to step back and look at the bigger picture. Ray J has had moments in the past where he defended major figures. Moments where he pushed back against rumors. Moments where he seemed aligned with the same industry names he's now indirectly putting into controversy. So when someone shifts like that, it doesn't just raise eyebrows. it raises suspicion. And that is where the first real twist hits. Because just as people started leaning into the idea that this might be exposing something, a new narrative began forming. What if this isn't about truth at all? What if this is about attention? Now pause on that. Because in today's digital environment, attention is everything. And controversial statements, they travel faster than facts. So suddenly, the focus shifts. Not on Beyonce, not on Jay-Z, but back onto Ray J. Because now people are asking, is this calculated? Is this strategic? Is this just another moment designed to go viral? And the more that question spreads, the more the entire situation flips. Because now, instead of people analyzing the claims, they're analyzing the intention behind the claims. And that's a completely different conversation. Because intention changes everything. If it's truth, people want proof. If it's attention, people want context. And right now, no one has either, which keeps the story alive. But here's where things get even more intense. Because while the internet is debating Ray J's motive, something else is happening quietly in the background. Silence from Beyonce. Silence from Jay-Z. No statements. No response. No engagement. And that silence, it's not calming anything down. It's amplifying everything. Because in situations like this, silence doesn't get interpreted as neutrality. It gets interpreted as strategy. And that opens the door for even more speculation. Because now people aren't just reacting to what Ray J said, they're reacting to the fact that nobody has shut it down publicly. And that is what keeps pushing the conversation forward. Because if it was completely irrelevant, wouldn't it be dismissed instantly? Wouldn't there be a quick response? A denial? Something to close the door? But that hasn't happened. And that absence is being filled with theories. Now here's the twist that really changes the direction of everything. Because just as people started expecting a response from the Carters, a completely different angle started gaining traction. One that has nothing to do with whether the claims are true or false, and everything to do with timing. Because some are now saying, this moment isn't random, that it's connected to larger conversations happening in the industry, that it's part of a pattern where certain voices suddenly become louder, right when attention is already high. Now again, nothing confirmed. But the idea itself, powerful enough to spread. Because if timing is intentional, then this isn't just a statement, it's a move. And that reframes everything. Because now Ray J isn't just someone talking, he becomes someone influencing the conversation. And whether that influence is based on truth or strategy doesn't even matter at this point, because the impact is already happening. And here's where the tension reaches its peak, because now we have three competing narratives at the same time. There might be truth here. This is just attention seeking. This is strategically timed, and none of them have been confirmed, which means all of them stay alive. And when multiple narratives exist at once, the story doesn't slow down, it multiplies. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. Because this situation isn't stabilizing, it's expanding. More reactions, more analysis, more speculation, and still no clear answer. Which brings us to the biggest question of all. What happens next? Because if this continues without a response, the narrative keeps growing. But if someone finally speaks, everything could flip instantly. And based on how intense this conversation has already become, that next moment is going to hit harder than anything we've seen so far. Because right now, we're not at the resolution. We're at the turning point. And whatever happens next is going to decide how this entire situation unfolds. And just when it felt like the situation couldn't get any more intense, it didn't slow down. It escalated. Because what started as a few shocking statements from Ray J didn't stay contained to clips and comments. It started spreading into something much bigger, much messier, and way more unpredictable. Because within hours, reaction videos started popping up everywhere. Podcasters breaking it down, influencers reacting in real time, commentators dissecting every word, every pause, every tone shift. And suddenly, this wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a full-blown conversation taking over timelines. But here's where things take a serious turn. Because as the conversation grew louder, so did the contradictions. On one side, people were saying, this is too detailed to ignore. But on the other, there's still zero proof. And that tension, that's what kept the situation alive. Because instead of settling into one clear narrative, it kept splitting, growing, evolving. And that's when something unexpected happened. Because just as the internet was focused on analyzing the claims, a different type of reaction started gaining traction. A quieter one, more calculated, less emotional. People started shifting from, "What did he say?" to "Peklavdak. Why is this being said right now?" And that is where everything changes. Because timing in situations like this is never ignored. And once people start questioning timing, they stop reacting emotionally and start thinking strategically. Now here's where the escalation turns into something deeper. Because multiple voices started pointing out something that most people missed at first. This isn't the first time wild claims have surfaced in the industry, but the way this one spread felt different, faster, more coordinated, almost like it was designed to travel. Now again, nothing confirmed, but the pattern? Hard to ignore. Because within minutes of the original statements, clips were already everywhere, edited, reposted, amplified. And when something spreads that fast, people start asking questions, real questions. And that leads us to the shocking reveal. Because as people dug deeper, a new narrative started forming, one that had nothing to do with whether the claims were true or false, and everything to do with attention. Because some are now saying, this moment wasn't just random. It was leveraged, used, pushed into the spotlight at the exact right time. And if that's true, then the entire situation flips. Because now, this isn't just about Ray J speaking. It's about the system around him reacting, amplifying, turning one moment into a massive conversation. And that is what makes it powerful. Because once a story reaches that level, it doesn't need confirmation to grow. It feeds on engagement. Now here's where things get even more intense. Because while all of this is happening, Beyonce and Jay-Z are still silent. No response, no statement, no attempt to shut anything down publicly. And that silence, it's doing something very specific. It's forcing the conversation to keep going. Because now, people aren't just reacting to what was said, they're reacting to what hasn't been said. And that creates even more speculation, more theories, more attention. And the longer that silence lasts, the bigger the story becomes. But wait, because this is where things take another unexpected turn. Because just as people started expecting a response, a different realization started spreading. One that changes how this entire situation is viewed. What if? This isn't about proving anything at all. What if the goal isn't truth, but impact? Now pause on that. Because if the goal is impact, then everything we're seeing makes sense. The shock value, the timing, the spread, the reaction, all of it. Because in today's world, you don't need proof to go viral. You need attention. And once you have that, the story takes on a life of its own. And that's exactly what's happening here. Because right now, this situation isn't being driven by facts. It's being driven by engagement, by curiosity, by people wanting to know more. And that's what keeps it moving. But here's the part that makes this even more intense. Because once a story reaches this level, it becomes bigger than the people involved. It turns into a moment, a conversation, something that continues even without new information. And that's where we are now. Because even without confirmation, even without responses, even without clarity, this story is still growing, still evolving, still pulling more people in. And that's what makes it unpredictable. Because at this point, it doesn't need anything new to stay alive. But if something new does drop, a statement, a denial, a response, then everything changes again. Because that's the nature of situations like this. They build quietly until one moment flips everything. And based on how intense this conversation has already become, that moment feels very close. Because right now, we're not watching the end of the story. We're watching the escalation. And whatever comes next is going to determine how big this really gets. And just like that, the moment those statements from Ray J started circulating, the internet didn't just react, it divided instantly. Because this wasn't your typical celebrity moment where everyone leans one way. This turned into a full-blown debate. A loud, messy, non-stop argument about what people just heard and what they think it means for Beyonce and Jay-Z. On one side, you've got the people who are locked in on the shock factor. They're replaying clips, quoting lines, and saying things like, "Why would he say all this if there wasn't something behind it?" That group isn't necessarily saying it's true, but they're not dismissing it either. They're sitting in that middle space curious, questioning, and fueling the conversation forward. And let's be real, that group is the reason this situation keeps growing, because uncertainty creates engagement. But on the other side, they're shutting it down completely. No hesitation. No debate. This is wild talk. No proof. This is exactly how rumors get out of control. And those voices, they're just as loud. Because to them, this isn't about curiosity. It's about credibility. And they're not buying it. Not even a little. And that is what makes this situation explode. Because now, it's not just about what Ray J said. It's about how people are choosing to interpret it. And once the internet splits like that, there's no controlling it anymore. But wait. Because this is where things level up. Because once the industry starts reacting, the story stops being just online noise. It becomes something bigger. And trust me, they're watching closely. Because multiple podcast hosts, influencers, and commentators have already started weighing in, and their takes are making everything even more intense. One podcast clip that's been circulating heavily had a host say, "This isn't even about the claims anymore. It's about why people are paying attention to them." Now that line, it hit. Because it shifted the entire focus from what was said. So, why is this trending? And suddenly, the conversation flips again. Now people are questioning the system behind the moment. How fast it spread, why it spread, who amplified it, and whether this is just another example of how viral culture works today. Then another influencer dropped a breakdown that added even more fuel. Notice how fast this turned into content before anyone even asked for proof. Now that? Yeah, people ran with it because it exposed something uncomfortable, that sometimes the reaction matters more than the reality. And here's where things get even more complicated. Because while all of this is happening, Beyonce and Jay-Z are still completely silent. No statements, no response, no attempts to control the narrative publicly. And that silence, it's not calming anything down. It's doing the opposite. Because now the internet is asking, if this is nothing, why not shut it down? And just like that, silence becomes part of the story, not the solution. Now here's where the reaction gets even more layered. Because fans aren't just debating Ray J anymore. They're debating the entire situation. Some are saying, this is exactly why certain people stay private, to avoid this kind of chaos. Others are saying, this is what happens when rumors aren't addressed early. And then there's a third group, the most engaged one, saying, we still don't know what's real. And that group is what keeps this story alive. Because as long as there's no confirmation, no denial, no closure, the conversation doesn't end. It grows. Even fan polls are showing how divided things really are. Is this serious or just noise? Should there be a response? Does silence mean anything? And the results? Completely split. No clear answer. Just more debate. And here's the most important part. Nobody controls the narrative anymore. Not Ray J. Not the audience. Not even the people being talked about. Because once a story reaches this level, it becomes its own thing. A loop of reactions feeding more reactions. A cycle that keeps going, even without new information. And based on how both the public and the industry are reacting right now, one thing is clear. This situation hasn't peaked yet. Not even close. Because the moment anything new drops, a response, a denial, another statement, this entire narrative is going to shift again. And when that happens, everything people believe right now could change instantly. Because this isn't just a viral moment anymore. It's a conversation that's still building, still evolving, still pulling people in. And trust me, what comes next is going to hit even harder. And just when it felt like the conversation had reached its loudest point, something changed. Not with a new clip, not with another statement from Ray J, but with what didn't happen. Because while the internet kept looping those same moments, while timelines stayed flooded, while debates kept getting louder, Beyonce and Jay-Z still said nothing. No reaction, no denial, no acknowledgement. And at first, people thought that silence meant one thing. They're ignoring it. But now, that interpretation is starting to shift, because the longer that silence continues, the more it starts to feel like something else entirely. Not avoidance, not confusion, but control. Now think about that, because in situations like this, most people expect a response. Something quick, something direct, something that shuts everything down. But when that response doesn't come, it creates a different kind of pressure, a pressure that keeps the story alive. Because now the conversation isn't just about what was said, it's about what's being held back. And that is where the final twist begins to form. Because a new idea is spreading, one that changes how everything looks. What if the silence isn't a reaction, but a strategy? What if saying nothing is actually the most powerful move in the situation? Because let's be real, every time someone responds publicly to something like this, they validate it. They give it more attention, more headlines, more life. But by staying completely quiet, you force the story to run on its own energy. And eventually, that energy burns out. At least, that's the theory. But here's where things get complicated. Because right now, the energy isn't burning out, it's building. And that's what's making people uneasy. Because if silence is supposed to calm things down, why is this still growing? Why are more people getting pulled in? Why are more reactions showing up every hour? And that's when the second twist hits. Because some are now saying, the silence isn't just about control, it's about observation, watching, tracking, letting everything unfold before making a move. Now again, nothing confirmed, but the idea itself, powerful enough to spread. Because if that's true, then this isn't over. It's waiting for the right moment, the right timing, the right move that shifts everything all at once. And that possibility is what's keeping people locked in. Because now, it's not just about Ray J anymore. It's not even about the original statements. It's about what comes next. Because if a response does happen, it won't just be random. It'll be calculated. And when something calculated enters a situation this loud, everything changes. But wait, because there's one more layer that takes this even deeper. Because while people are focusing on silence, they're missing something else entirely. Fatigue. Yeah, fatigue. Because in the middle of all this noise, some people are starting to step back, question everything, reevaluate what they're even reacting to. And that creates a different kind of shift. Because once people start questioning the conversation itself, the entire narrative weakens. And that might be the real endgame here. Not a response, not a denial, but letting the story collapse under its own weight. Now think about how different that is. Because instead of fighting the narrative, you let it exhaust itself. And if that's what's happening, then everything we've been watching, every reaction, every debate, every theory, is part of a cycle that eventually fades. But here's the catch. We're not there yet. Because right now, the conversation is still alive, still growing, still unpredictable. Which means the final question remains unanswered. Will someone break the silence? Or will the silence itself end the story? Because whichever happens first determines everything. And based on how intense this situation has already become, that moment is going to hit hard. Because right now, we're not at the conclusion, we're at the edge. And whatever happens next is going to decide how this entire situation is remembered. Because this isn't just about what was said anymore, it's about how it ends. And trust me, however it ends, nobody is ready for it. Now I need you to really think about this. After everything we just broke down about Ray J, Beyonce, and Jay-Z, where do you stand? Do you think this is just another viral moment that got blown out of proportion? Or do you believe there's something deeper behind why these statements are getting so much attention? Be honest. Because right now, the internet is completely divided. Some people are saying, this is too detailed to ignore. Others are saying, there's no proof, so it means nothing. And then there's that middle group, the ones who aren't fully convinced either way, but can't stop watching to see what happens next. So which one are you? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. And don't just say real or fake. Break it down. Tell me why you believe what you believe. Because this is one of those situations where the conversation is just as important as the story itself. And let's talk about the silence too. Do you think Beyonce and Jay-Z are handling this the right way by not responding? Or do you think staying quiet is actually making things bigger? Because that question alone is fueling half the debate online right now. If you made it this far, hit that like button, because you already know this isn't just regular celebrity news. This is one of those situations that keeps evolving the more people talk about it. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because the moment any new update drops, a response, a denial, another statement, we're breaking it down instantly. No waiting, no missing details, just the full picture as it unfolds. And trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next.